This is such a pleasure. It really is huge pleasure, and thank you. And I have to say that interviews for projects are terrifying. You go in there and you have no idea who's going to be there, and you start to talk, and you can see people sort of drifting off and thinking about their holidays, and the unread lecture that they have to, etc. And I had the strangest experience, which was such a kind of Cambridge experience. I showed a slide when I was trying to explain what I wanted to do, which was of a palimpsest, one of those great texts where one text is on top of another. And then I moved on to the other one, and someone said, "Go back to that one, I'm halfway through it." And I realised there was a chance that I was talking to the right kind of people. This is my first public art commission. It's a hugely significant thing for me, and it's hugely significant because it's really, really personal. It couldn't be more personal for me. Partly because I read English here, and I used to walk constantly, be swept by the wind, up and round past the English faculty and down to the UL. And so this is kind of a site I know really, really well. And so to kind of bring something different back into this place, this particular place, was very interesting and very perplexing. So what I want to do is to kind of walk you through some of the things that made me do this very odd thing for the people in this building. But I wanted to start, because I'm going to be talking about writing and making that comes out of reading, and the reading that goes into making. Okay? And there's going to be quite a lot of silences too, but all those things are going to happen. But I'm going to start with this image, which really, really matters to me. It's Gerrit Rietveld, the incredible artist, Dutch artist, and this is an unbuilt building that he wanted to build. And it's about, you can't see anything there. You really can. Come sit here, and I could talk directly to you if you wanted to come sit here. You okay? Yeah, fine. And it's an unbuilt building, and for me, this is an incredibly evocative thing, because it's about the hand. It's about the architecture, it's about tactility, it's about space, it's about touching space, and what that might mean. And that is absolutely central to all of the things I do, is that sense of tactility, that grounding, that bringing back to your bodily experience, your somatic experience of being somewhere in the world. And that's why I make things, but curiously enough, that's also why I write things, because I have a rather bizarre feeling about language. What do I do? Well, I make structures. I make quite severe structures, architectural structures, which I then inhabit, which I then bring things in conjunction. I bring the objects, which are made out of porcelain, which are thrown on a wheel, like all good porcelain objects should be, and I bring them together with severe, understandable, lucid, candid structures. This, for instance, is a huge wall piece called On the Middle Watch that I've just made, which is 611 little porcelain pots glazed in 7 different white glazes. And each one takes seconds to make, 30 seconds, something like that to make, and then slightly longer to trim, and then even longer to glaze. So the whole thing takes X amount of hours, and the whole piece takes X amount of months to make. But when you have it in front of you, I hope all that disappears, and you just have the sense of movement, of a particular kind of movement. And that idea of making something which is very substantial out of lots of elements. This is a porcelain wall, which very grandly is now installed in a house in London. Or this idea of using engineering terms, engineering things, like this great I-beam here, which is inhabited with these black pots. I'm very proud of my black pots. It's my new colour. 30 years on white. A year on black. You'll see more of these black pots They're really, really stunning, actually. White has got a very odd relationship with black, which isn't as banal as it sounds. It's quite banal, but it's actually secretly very, very, very impressive thing to say. Anyway, there's lots of black ahead of me. There's also quite a lot of white ahead of me. I've started writing another book, which we might come to. Are we allowed to talk about?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, we might come to another book, if pressed. So, structure. And the great thing about making structures like this is, of course, that they are all very textual, by which I mean a lot of these things come out of thinking about how words are put together. They are lines, and you can have lines of objects just like you can have lines of words. And as soon as you put words together into different forms, you have all kinds of rhythms. You have all kinds of ways of thinking about cadence. You have all kinds of lyrical opportunities, because the world of objects is a world which is made up of sound, and the world of words is also a world of objects, because words are objects as much as they are signs. That's what I didn't learn from the English faculty, by the way. That comes out of the strangeness of making pots and writing poetry simultaneously, and really realising that different words have completely different weights to them. I had a very marvellous supervisor here, complicated and marvellous supervisor called Geoffrey Hill, the great poet, who was very, very, very tough on me. And I did a dissertation on David Jones, the great Welsh artist and poet and inhabitant of Kettle's Yard. I look towards the director of Kettle's Yard at this moment. And David Jones had this wonderful word for the presence of objects and words in the world. And he called it hachiety, thingness, the thingness of the world, the hachiety of the world. And that is very much my sense of why objects matter. Now, these are odd because this is actually based on a fragment of a Hesiod, which of course you can all see instantly. Of course you can't see it instantly, but for me it's a fragment of Hesiod. That's my starting point. But actually what it is, it's some pots in front of you in these vitrines, these black glass cases, and there are some pots which are hidden behind a piece of opaque glass. And they're there and they're not there simultaneously. They are shadows in some way, who are always present. But the strange thing about doing these shadow cabinets, you can see them perhaps here, I think none of you can see down there at all, but up here, is that they come and go. As the light changes during the day, the ones which are in the back, in this opaque, receding vitrine, suddenly become to the fore. They actually become more present than the ones in front of you. Now, that sounds kind of just like a trick, but it actually matters enormously, because what it means is that you have to take cognizance of how things change during the day. You have to come back to things. It's an iterative process. You have to walk away and come back. Now you know that that kind of experience of art, where you walk and you come back, is the most interesting one there is. It's not the one take. It's not the one-liner. It's not the kind of cultural moment of having the kind of aesthetic joke which makes you feel clever. It's about trying to make something which slows you down and brings you back. And that's what I'm interested in. This is a piece called Sculpture for a Large Wall, and all it is a huge piece of glass with a whole series of 18 vessels down at the bottom behind opaque glass. And the further you go away from it, the more they become in focus. I think that's really clever. And this is a piece called Carmen, with a K, K-A-M-E-N, which comes out of Ossip Mandelstein's first book of poems, Stone. And the stoniness of his poems is something that really appeals to me, the thingness of them. But I didn't want to do a thingy kind of installation. I wanted to do something which actually had my feeling about Mandelstam. Now, this is all very well and good, but they have been called in the press. These objects I'm making, they're compared to a very bad eye test. So critics are out on this one, but tough. Because actually, why have everything all at once? Why disclose everything? Why not have things that reveal themselves slowly? There's lots of the world that reveals itself slowly, and that is part of how we understand the world and how we think about the world. It's also how we write books and research books. Not everything happens all at once. So one of my obsessions and one of my ways of working in the world is to think about the places where things are kept apart. And one of the places that things are kept apart in is, of course, attics. So I made a series of attics. This was at Kettle's Yard, which again really infuriate people. They go, why is it so badly lit? And it's badly lit for a very good reason, because actually lots of things are in shadows. Lots of things that matter to us aren't well lit. Lots of things that we care about are on that liminal threshold experience of being somewhere put aside, because you put things into attic spaces, like you put things into archives, because they're precious or because you're uncertain about where they stand in the world. It's not just abandoning things. It's not about just getting them out of your sight, though that's also really, really interesting. And there are a lot of psychoanalysts in the room tonight. The examined life is dangerous territory for me. But it's also a place where things that are the most precious are put. So the idea of the attic or the archive as a threshold is something that really, really matters to me. And in fact, I had the opportunity of working recently with the Rothschild archive in Windmill Hill, a very beautiful building, and I made them a piece called Unpacking My Library, which comes from my favourite Walter Benjamin essay, where he's finally, after years of peregrinations, he's found all his books have arrived in packing cases, and he starts to unpack his library for the first time in years. And as he picks up every single volume, he remembers that this children's book he bought at an auction in Frankfurt, and this inherited from his great-grandmother, and this is a book that was given to him by a collector in Paris. And every time he opens another case and picks up another book, he has this synapse of energy between the book and his memory. And so I thought it was perfect for an archive to make a piece called Unpacking My Library, but no one had read the essay. And this one, too, for the same place, which is called Remembering X, I Think of Y. Because, rather mistakenly, I wrote a book a few years ago about my family, which involved a huge amount of research. And one of the things that happened to me in the research for the book is that I kept getting lost, obsessionally lost, in archives. I kept getting drawn to one thing and then ending up doing something else, and whole years of my life went past in this vagabonding kind of way. Flanneurial is the posh term for it, but it wasn't flanneurial at all. That sounds much too well dressed. It was more vagabonding. It was more getting lost. And remembering X, I think of Y. That idea that when you're in a library, an archive, a place, a town, and you think of one thing, you start getting lost because all kinds of other things occur. But you're always brought back to the place you're in, to that grounded place in which you are. Because what I'm interested in is embedding what I do, my practice, the things I make, in particular places. This can lead to a sense of embeddedness is absolutely crucial. And so I make things for particular places. This is for Mima, Middlesbrough, characteristically cheerful day in Middlesbrough. Sorry, cheap joke. And into the floors of buildings, or indeed into the domes of buildings. And this was a piece called Signs and Wonders that I installed in the dome of the V&A. It's 70 feet above you. If you come into the V&A, the main grand way, and you get your bag searched. If you pause there, there's lots. Why do you come and sit? Anyone who wants to come in, they can come and sit on the floor. We're not being grand here at all. There's lots of floor up the front. This is brilliant. This is a really capacity audience. It's very impressive, Crash. If you pause on the threshold of the V&A and you look up, high above you, you'll catch a glimpse of this red girder, this sort of Donald Judd red girder in the dome. And if you can hardly see anything, it's just a flash of red, but if you go up a little bit further, you'll discover that it's populated with lots and lots of pots, 450 pots. And there's nowhere that you can see the whole installation in its entirety. You have to, if you want to, walk around to try and see it. But what it is, it's a whole series. This is me being very scared. I hate heights, installing the piece. This is how you'll never see it. It's got 450 pieces of porcelain up there, and it's a conversation with the collections of the V&A. Up there are my memories of Korean and Chinese porcelain, of Bauhaus porcelain, of Meissen and Wedgwood, all kinds of things up there. And there are lots of things that people hidden within pots that no one even knows about at all apart from me, which is utterly perverse, I know. But actually what it's trying to do is to do something very, very simple, which is to give a resting place for a memory of a museum inside a museum. It's trying to make a collection within a collection. And it's up very high, so you can't move it around. The great thing about museums is that things are always in transit, they're always coming and going. And I wanted to make something which actually just stayed up there and gathered dust. I was doing this installation during the last year of writing my book, and I was making this installation during the day and I was writing all night. It was a very tough, sort of irradiated year for me because I hardly slept for a year. And what I was trying to do, I kind of post hoc have worked out that what I was trying to do was finish a book about diaspora, about objects being dispersed around the world, and I was actually making something that could never be moved. That's my examined life moment for this evening. Because it's up there, and you can't touch it. And that's a great thing. Why can't we pick up your pots? Well, I spent a good 30 years of my life making pots for people to pick up and use and handle, and I'm a great evangelist for tactility. But I'm also very, very interested in not touching things. I'm very interested in the aspiration to touch, the yearning to touch, the loss of touch, the holding away from you of things. Again, this doesn't go down very well with visual arts critics, who assume that everything to do with pottery, with the world of objects, has to be in the hands. But of course it doesn't. There's a lot that can happen just out of touch. So, I've got to speed up, haven't I, actually? I have actually got to speed up. So I wrote this book. No one asked me to write this book, but I wrote it. It's a book about these. It's about Netscape. And I got given this collection. I don't know how many of you have read this book. It'd be quite useful to actually know if anyone has. Oh, bloody hell. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, Junior. Okay. Right, we'll get to the last page then. What this book was about my family, and it was about trying to make sense of what I hadn't heard about where I came from. was trying to make sense of my inheritance as a child of a Jewish refugee who was completely silent about his childhood. And it was trying to make sense of the fact that I grew up in an Anglican household in Canterbury with a mum who taught church history and my father was a Dean of Canterbury, but there was something Jewish going on. And it took a long time, and the result has been kind of interesting and confusing. The most interesting and confusing element of which has been being in correspondence with an extraordinary number of people who have similar stories and backgrounds, and for whom what I thought was a completely unique, in my innocence, story about possession and dispossession had resonance with. And the point about this is that trying to make sense of these beautiful, funny, quirky, erotic, silly, and delightful objects which are in my life and in my family's life brought me into connection with archives, family photographs, archives of objects in Parisian life. This is a Medici bed that my great-uncle Charles bought and unstitched the M for Medici and put E for a Frussy. Help. And finding sale catalogues. This is now at the Getty. And finding images of Parisian lovers and of lost paintings. This is the one I want back. And finding strange moments where very complicated books coincide with my very particular story. This is the moment that I really slowed down the story. It's this wonderful bundle of asparagus. My great-great-uncle Charles bought this from the painter, and it was meant to be 800 francs, and he sent 1,000 francs. And the next day, a single stem of asparagus was sent, saying, "This has slipped from the bundle." And it's a story which turns up in Proust, because at that point, Charles's secretary was Proust. And you try writing a book about memory, where Proust suddenly turns up a third of the way through. It's difficult. And it's difficult to hold in your head and in your heart remarkable art, which has this sonority with a family story, with horrific history, with the Dreyfus affair, and of course with the Anschluss, with family books which are all about reading childhood stories, and family photographs of happy occasions, with, this is my grandmother, whose novel was published today, 50 years after she wrote it, The Exile's Return, about some Jewish people returning to Vienna after the war. Extraordinary poignant book. And living in exile wherever you are, either in Tunbridge Wells or living in Japan, wherever the diaspora takes you. But at every point, having this feeling that there is this hachiety, this thingness about memory. This is the portrait of my father as Dean of Canterbury, but dressed as a rabbi, done by an elderly great-aunt cousin, Marie-Louise von Monteschitzky. How do you make sense of all this complexity? Well, what you do is you make things. you make your way out of this complexity. And if you're me, what you do is you look at books and you think about how texts work, and you look at the orthography and the meaning of all the things you've come across in your peregrinations. You look at the archives. You think about those archives in Vienna where things are redacted, where things are ripped out. You think about the Parisian archives. You think about all the lists that you find in Odessa, way, way back in the 1850s, before things started to go so wrong. And you look at other people's archives. You look at Walter Benjamin's archives here, and you think about him and his way of understanding the world by trying not to tidy things into groups, but simply to find places where he can put his hands on things. Because that's one of the reasons for having archives. Book, box, personal and business paper stamp certificates, 29 small yellow-brown envelope, Parents' Summer, 1921. It's kind of poignant, and it's also realistic at the same time, because realism and poignancy are actually really important to bring together. It's not about romanticising your memories. It's about being exact about them and going back to the place where you can put your hands on them. It's about that kind of travel, the travel into history and the travel into objects. And it's even into museums. It's going back into this list from the Fitzwilliam, where everything has a particular function. And you get down to the vessels in the Fitzwilliam 5090, and then you get to vessel, perhaps, 1. And as soon as you get to that 1, you realise you're onto something. Because at every point, things are exact. Things are in your hands in the archives. You've suddenly worked out why your grandmother mentioned something about Lake Lucerne, and you've spent 3 days trying to find this old family house in Exeter, and you find it, and suddenly something else fits about another thing that she mentioned and a poem she wrote in 1915, and it does take 3 days, but there's always that perhaps moment that has to be held in your hands too. And as soon as you can do that, what happens? You start to make things again. And again, in this I'm such a slow learner. It's ridiculous. This wretched book got published, and I had an exhibition at the same time. And I was in the space of the exhibition, and I suddenly realised that I'd actually made my first vitrine. This has got glass in front of it. And I thought, I always loved vitrines, but I'd never made a vitrine. And then I thought, actually, do you know what, damn it, sorry. I'd actually spent all these years tracing the history of these objects in a vitrine, which were out of touch and in touch simultaneously, held away and then brought into people's hands. And I'd finally made a vitrine. And I looked at it and I realised it's actually based on the Talmud, as obviously everyone here can see, particularly the front row. And I realised I'd done it wrong, because actually it was not just a single vitrine, it was actually a book. So I made another one with slightly opaque glass and slightly different, because of course that's what you do. You close the book up. You open your vitrine or you close your book, and they're the similar actions, because objects and words are the same. And the marks in porcelain and the marks on a page are the same. They're not slightly different. For me, they are the same. And so I started doing autobiographical vitrines, scenes from early life, going back to objects that I made a very long time ago in Japan, 35 years ago, as a young man, and started making things that could sit. This is called Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, where I could make things where you could see things and you could see your reflection at the same time. So making objects. for different places. And last year, I had an invitation from Waddesdon. Now, Waddesdon is this extraordinary ersatz French chateau in Buckinghamshire. It's ridiculous. You're going through leafy Buckinghamshire, and then there's these towers, and you're in the Loire. And it's a Rothschild villa from the 1870s. And they asked me to make an installation for them. Something, a conversation with the house. And when I first went there, it was winter. And this is what I saw. Because the house is put to bed in winter, and the great clocks are covered with these white muslin cloths, and all this incredible porcelain. This is the greatest porcelain in Europe. This is Sèvres, of unimaginable vulgarity, richness, wonderful. It's put into these, more gilding than you can believe possible. It's put into these extraordinary 18th and 19th century travelling cases. And things are locked away. And so going in, it was like a sort of Visconti film. It was absolutely fantastic. It was so melancholy. You'd have loved it. Absolutely fantastic. And going around this crazy house, which was just full of stuff, thinking about what I was going to do. And I realised what I wanted to do was to be in the house and not be in the house at the same time. To be invisible and apart, but in conversation with this place. And so what I did was to hide work. This is that great. I made these travelling cases of lead and put porcelain in them. And then under one of the enormous Reynolds portraits, I put these vitrines. And wherever I could find a space, this is an enormous a writing desk. It's a desk to write to sign away a state treaty or marry a princess off. It's incredible things. It's beyond any stretch of decency, this desk. Years of people's lives were spent making this desk. And I re-inhabited it with these inky pots. And I scattered things. What I tried to do was to make things in groups. This is a group called a promise. A very Jewish series of single pots, almost like candles, within these very simple vitrines. And then I scattered them round the house. And almost no one, except one of my children, who's about your age down there, found the last one hidden in this bookcase here. Because actually, what it was about finding this house, this extraordinary Jewish house, which is all about collecting and all about assimilation. But it's assimilation with a complete edge to it. It's saying, we don't really belong here. We're going to build a French chateau, which you can come to. And it's going to be filled with the most extraordinary European art. But it's in the middle of Bedfordshire. So it's kind of complicated. Very complicated. So I made slightly complicated objects, some of which, like this great pile of plates, hovering, have a kind of untidiness to them. No one had really thought about washing up in the Rothschilds, I think, for a very long time. So we are actually getting, belatedly, to your installation, your local history. I really love buildings, and I'm a bit of a kind of architect manqué, and these are some vitrines that I made last year called 1,000 Hours, which try and hold porcelain in different places. There are 1,000 pots in here, and some you can see, and some are below you. This is as far down as I'd ever got. And some are high above you, and they seem to float. I rather love this picture. You can't see it, but I love it. And so when the invitation after my scary interview came through, and they said, yes, we'd like to work with you here, I started to try and put my ideas together. And they were ideas about texts and archives and palimpsests, one thing written over another, things that are kept apart and kept special, but at to hand, things that you don't quite know where they are as well, hiddenness. And I also thought about all the diverse people in this building. There are extraordinary, eclectic group of people who work here and come through. And I really realised that this was my opportunity to not do one big show-off piece of work, one sort of spectacular destination thing, which I hate anyway. I mean, I couldn't do it if you paid me. But to do something which was really about the journey into the building and the journey out of the building, something about the threshold of the building. And so looking and thinking hard about who's going to use this building and why they're using it, I came up with two ideas. One was to make a piece for inside. I don't know if you've seen it, it's for the people who are visitors here, but it's just out here. Is there going to be wine afterwards? Yes. Okay, there is going to be wine afterwards, and when you have your wine, if you look up, you will see this, which is, ooh, actually you won't see us, this is us installing it. Have we got the PowerPoint going slow now? Is that sort of intentional? You'll see this. So this is high above you as you drink your wine. It's called Atlas. And it's an atlas. It's a kind of map, and it's a map of 25 years of my life. Every time I made a very big porcelain jar, and it went wrong, I broke the pot up, but I kept the lid. And over 25 years, I had a huge number of lids. So this is an installation, a group of work, which is made up out of the lost, broken pots. It maps an awful lot of hours of my life. And I thought it was quite good to have quite a lot of lost things in this building. But outside, I wanted to do things below you. And so this is me arranging things in these vitrines. And what you've got out here in a local history, because that's what it's called, local, because it's absolutely embedded history, because everything's history, is a whole series of different kinds of memory. You've got large porcelain dishes, which are taken from a mould from a 13th century Chinese pot. So I had this Chinese pot, we took a mould from it, and then we made, I have to say, with great difficulty, a series of glazed and unglazed porcelain versions of it. So already it's got that sense of memory and echo. And then there are pots which I've mended with gold, and gold appears not in a Rothschildian spirit of bring on the gold, though I suppose I could be inhabiting that part of my family history a bit more, but in the sense of the Japanese tradition, where you gild the thing that's broken and is most precious. There is this incredibly, incredibly poetic thing that goes right back to the 12th century, where if you had an incredibly special object and it was chipped or broken, you didn't throw it away, you mended it with gold lacquer, and it was more precious because it had been broken. And that idea of actually recognising that journey is, of course, something that is part of my life. The fact that it has been broken is more special than if it wasn't broken. And so in this vitrine, there are flashes of gold, which I have to say that really, I was here, and it was a Cambridgey kind of day with a little bit of moisture in the air. And I thought they looked actually rather good. The gold seemed to shine through. And here we are pondering things. And there are also great porcelain platters. This is taken from a Wedgwood 1790s plate. And this is taken from a Sèvres plate. So you've got Stoke-on-Trent, and you've got Sèvres, and you've got Imperial China from Jingdezhen. And you've got scattered fragments, and you've got porcelain jars. And then you've got a grid across them. And this isn't just health and safety. This is to make them disappear even more. And they're scattered across the forecourt here, and they're not lit. There was an early conversation where people were saying, well, couldn't we light them? You know, you can do very clever things with photovoltaic things where they could light and glow at night. And no, do you know what? No. They're there in the gloom. And if you want to come back and see them in the daylight, pray for daylight. Come back in March. But actually, that's the point. That's the iteration of coming and going. That's the embodiment of actually making something which is an embedded bit of art. And that's why they're here, because that's what you do here. You keep coming in to work. That's why they're here. So, what am I doing next? I'm trying to make things that float. This is for Turner Contemporary, a new David Chipperfield building by the sea. These are based on the sea horizon. I don't know if we can actually do this. And we've just been asked by Chipperfield, who's redesigning a building here in Victoria, to make a significant piece of public. Do you know what? A big piece of public art, not significant. I hate the scrub the word significant. A big piece of art. What they don't know is that they're going to get vitrines in the ground that no one can see. I mean it. And I've got 5 slides left. And I just want to say this is how it actually happens. This was yesterday in the studio. My desk. Current. No? Can we go back? Current reading. And downstairs, trying to make pots for an exhibition in New York, where the deadline is scarily, scarily close. So pots going into the kiln, and me desperately counting pots, and counting them, and counting them, and counting them, and playing either really bad music to keep me going, or the Goldberg variations. But everything to try and get through another day, and try and finish something by the time I walk home. And that's for you, and thank you very, very much.